Hello everyone, my name is Navdeep from Silver Fern Education and I hope you guys are keeping well. I'm making this video in English to make sure all our viewers are around this or across this knowledge of funding of New Zealand study visa. I mostly make my videos in Punjabi, so most of the comments I get or the calls that I get are from non-Punjabi speakers. That the problem that I get from those candidates is the question that they raise is, why don't you make videos in Hindi or English on that note? So I try to make videos in different languages every now and then, but I will try to keep up the pace in English and Hindi more often. So with the funding of New Zealand, I want you to keep a few notes about the funding of New Zealand so that you guys are well aware what the fund requirement is of New Zealand immigration, or how can you make the funding right, even if you have some of the new funds, not the old 6 months old funds. How can you make those funds right in the eyes of Immigration New Zealand? I have explained in several videos in the past in Punjabi that if you have funding of total course of your study as well as the living expense of that total course of the length of the studies, you are well fine with your Immigration New Zealand questions. But the main question arises is that the immigration can always ask you where this funding has come from. So the source of fund is most important thing as compared to having the funds worth of 6 months old on an instance. So for example, if you have funds worth of 6 months old, but you don't have source of funding, immigration can always come back and ask you where this money has come from 6 months ago. Or on that note, 1 year ago, where did this money come from? So rather than working on funding to make it 6 months old, you need to make sure that the source of funding is clear as crystal. If the source of funding is very clear, you can use the funding of even 1 month or 15 days old funding for your Immigration New Zealand application. For example, if your parents have sold a piece of land or a property or any other asset, and you have proper sale and purchase agreements of that specific asset, you can use that money toward your application or your study visa application. There is no problem in that. I see a lot of videos on YouTube from different consultants claiming that you can only use the money that's 6 months old. You cannot lodge your application under 6 months old funds. I try to emphasize as much as possible in my videos that there is no need of making the fund 6 months old if you have the specific source of your funding. It can be 4 months old, it can be 3 months old. There is no such given rule from Immigration New Zealand that can be followed by the candidates. That's what I mean to say. So this is set this one thing apart, that how you can use the funding or whatnot. We will talk about in this video about the sponsorship from New Zealand. So for example, if you have a relative or a cousin or a second cousin or whoever from your relatives or family living in New Zealand and is on permanent resident status, can sponsor your study visa while sitting in New Zealand. So if that sponsor is sitting in New Zealand, that's the only way they can show money on behalf of you as source of funding. But when they're sitting here in India, they can't be your sponsor. Being in India, only your mother, father, and your grandparents or your paternal grandparents can show money on the sponsorship. There is a form called financial undertaking that one person has to fill. I do get a lot of questions from candidates that Australia can accept 2 sponsors, 3 sponsors in some scenarios, but why can't we have 2 sponsorships in New Zealand study visa? There is only one answer to that I can answer, is that there is a form called financial undertaking that the person who sponsors you has to fill. And there is the beauty of this form is that only one person can fill this form, not 2 people can sign this form. Plus, you cannot have 2 financial undertaking forms attached to your application. Immigration will not accept it. It's not the genuine way of showing your funding. So only one source of funding, only one sponsor can sponsor you for your study visa of New Zealand. I do get a question that my father is a full-time employee and my mother is a full-time employee as well, and both of them have good funds in their account. How can I use both of those funds? That's my responsibility to make sure that those funds are getting used. The way I look at it is I will get the funds consolidated into one person's account and make that person financial undertaker for you. But that's not the video about today. The video is mostly about the sponsorships from New Zealand. So for example, you have your cousin from your paternals who's living there in New Zealand and is permanent resident, and that person has total funds worth of 40,000 in the account. That means they can show total amount of 40,000 in their account, and that means they can show that money to sponsor you and your study in New Zealand. In case you want to pay the fee from India and only want to show the funds from New Zealand, that makes a problem. That makes another problem, that you will have two sponsorships. One, for example, your father, who's paying the fees on your behalf, and the second, that's your cousin sitting in New Zealand who wants to sponsor the living expense of your study course period. So here comes the solution, that you can pay your first year's fee upfront to the immigration. That doesn't justify that you can use the fresh funds without the source of income to pay the fee. Of course, you'll need the source of funds, because even if you have paid the fees in advance, immigration can always come back and ask you, where did this money come from that has been used for the fee of your first year of course? So have the source of funding from your parents, pay the fees of first year. And for example, you have a study of 3 years and first year's fee has been paid by your father. Next year's financial undertaking and the following year, the third year financial undertaking form will be done by your cousin that's sitting in New Zealand. That's absolutely great solution for those who want to use the funding from India as well as the sponsorship from the New Zealand. I hope it clears the doubts that you might have about funding in your head, and wave off some of the worries from your head that you don't really need to have the funds worth of 6 months. You can have fresh funds as well, as long as you have the source of them. That's what I wanted to convey in this message. I hope you find this video very helpful. Make sure to share this video with someone who really needs to understand the funding criteria of New Zealand study visa. Subscribe this channel, because we always try to keep the pace at the level of truth. We don't try to make fake scenarios. We don't try to make fake promises. I'll see you guys in the next upcoming videos. Until then, best of luck.